Hey there everyone, I'm Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and I'm back with another new board game and another worst unboxing ever. What does that mean? Well, hang on. This has nothing to do with the game itself. This is more of me eschewing the social norm. See, in most unboxing videos, someone will open a game for the first time, showing off pieces and components you nor they know anything about. In this video, I'll show you a game I've already opened, already organized, and already played, meaning I can show you the pieces and tell you a bit about what they do, and tell you some basic rules, and even share some feedback from my first plays. This isn't a review. I'm not here to tell you pros or cons, just to give you an idea of what you might find inside this game. So with all that cleared up, let's lift the lid. Okay, today I am looking at the very new and very heavy Ascending Empires Zenith edition. This is from Ian Cooper with art by Sergei Marseille, and this is published by Play to Z Games. Now this is a remake of an older game, also called Ascending Empires, also from Ian Cooper, but that one was published by Z-Man Games. Now, this is a 4X game. Players will be exploring, exploiting, expanding, and exterminating, but the main element here is a dexterity element where you'll be moving around your ships by sort of flicking them around the play area. There is a lot in this box, so let's go ahead and open things up. The first thing that you will see here, well, these are some 1-point victory tokens. We'll get back to those. And there is a rule book here, which I did sit on, so thus the little crease in the booklet, but that's okay. All right, let me real quick just run through the rule book. Obviously shows you the components, and I'll actually be referring back to this section as I get into the rest of this video, but I did want to show you that there are, besides of course the rules of the game, there is a section that covers some variants of play, which I'm still not there yet. Here's your setup for 2 and 3 players. I'll cover a little bit of that here in this video. Here are some variable setup and optional modules. I'll just kind of briefly cover a few of these. There is also rules in here for the original game of Ascending Empires. Now, I have not played any of these variants or any of these other rules, but if you are familiar with or want to sort of revisit the original game, those rules are here. There is also a solo campaign. I cannot imagine how solo works in a dexterity game, but that might interest some folks here. And then a whole bunch of these different scenarios, a little bit of a summary of some of the tokens you might discover here in the back of the book, but that is about it. And like I said, I'm going to revisit this here in a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and stick it off to the side. All right, here we have some player boards. Now, you might find this a little bit amusing. We have red and green and blue and yellow as our 4 player colors. Let me organize that here a little better. All right, set those off to here. We have 2 play mats, and these are sort of punctured. There are these holes in them for the planet tokens. I'll get to those a little bit. I'm going to set these out of the way for right now. Maybe, so they don't roll off my chair. Okay, now I mentioned the 4 players of 4 colors of player board. Here is your red, your blue, your yellow, and then white. There are not green pieces in this box for a green player, at least not in my copy. I'm only assuming that yours might be the same. All right, then down here in the bottom, we have some other pieces. Let me make sure this is centered in the frame. Sorry about that. Here we have some cards. These are obviously some player aids. There are some endgame scoring cards, and then there are some other components in here for those various variants and modules that I mentioned earlier. Here are some 5-point victory tokens. Now here are, let me cover these first. So some planets that you discover in the game, you'll actually be able to kind of terraform into a different type of planet. These are the cardboard tokens that you'll put over top of those planets to do so. These are discovery tokens, and they're organized into alpha, beta, gamma, and delta quadrants. I'll cover that when we start to look at the mats. These purple robots are for, at least in the 2-player game, they may also be used in the solo game, I'm not sure, but they're definitely used in a 2-player game. These, I believe, are ancient libraries, and they are used in one of the variants. And then these large pieces, I cannot even see them from where I am sitting, but these are mega structures, again used in one of the variants of the game. Very nice looking miniature components. All right, now let's get over to these. So these are the different planet types that you'll come across in the game. I don't think they're actually named, so they're simply purple, pink, yellow, and green, or kind of a red and green actually, sort of a reddish orange. And then there are also, there's a handful of those in the different colors. More of the same. Actually, I think these might be, yeah, these are all planets. In this tray, we have relic planets. These are the ones that you can eventually terraform to be a different planet type. So like I said, these tokens will sit over top of the relic planets. They're not used in the two-player game. I'll mention that much right now. There are also in here artifact discs. I'll cover those. And then we have here alien warships. Those are also used in the two-player game, but otherwise they are a variant that you can choose to use in your playthroughs. All right, so let me just kind of quickly clean up some of this. And then I do want to show you very quickly what is in the player trays. I'm going to use blue because it is my favorite color. So let me just show you real quick what we have here, and then I'm going to go ahead and get the mats out onto the table and let you sort of see what this game looks like set up. So these here are technology tiles. They relate to the colors of the planets. I'll cover kind of how those work here in a moment. I do not know what these are for. I'm assuming they're for one of the variants. This is a warp gate. Each player will have one of these in their player color, and it's kind of their starting location to begin the game. This is a measuring stick. So if you think of games like Attack Wing or Attack Fleet, I believe is the Star Trek version, that sort of use measuring sticks, you know, for those tabletop war games. This is kind of the same idea. This is used in combat, which I'll cover briefly, but there's also a variant where you can actually use this as your movement instead of flicking those discs across the play area. This token, this is, I know, used in two-player games. These are actually for setting up wormholes for a smaller player count. I do not know what this side is for, but it looks like another planet of some kind. These cubes are going to be used to denote missions that you have completed. They'll also be used to mark technologies as you gain them. These are your Starbase tokens. These are your standard ships. I keep moving this stuff off of frame. These are your standard ships. These are advanced ships, which are gained through technology. And then we have these miniatures, and I know I'm only going to be able to get these so detailed on this overhead camera, but we have outposts, very nicely detailed miniatures. We have cities, which are here. Also a neat looking sculpt on these cities. And then we have research facilities here. I always say these things look like cake. They just kind of have this texture to them. It looks like, you know, some sort of a fondant cake. I don't know. And then we have our troops. Again, nice looking miniatures here in the troops. And then here, lastly, we have these little energy tokens, also a lock token, and I'll cover those here in a moment. Okay, let me, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and set the mats out and just give you a very, very quick overview of how this game works. I'll be right back. Okay, as promised, I have a very basic setup here on the table. I have the two mats that form the play area. I will mention two things. First of all, you'll notice here in the center there is, again, this alpha, beta, gamma, delta symbology. And in this particular, on these mats at least, those symbols are also over here on the edges. So you can actually flip these mats, which does ever so slightly change the play area. These holes that are punched into these mats are different on each one. So if you flip the sides, it will be a slightly different play area. Second thing is that I do have a full size, a single mat of the same size with all the same symbology, but of course it can't be flipped or swapped. So it's always going to be the same each time you play it. Now these mats, you can kind of see there's a light seam here in between. I did not notice any problems flicking over this, so probably buying that one-piece mat wasn't really necessary. What are you gonna do? Anyways, that's how the play area sets up. Now, as I mentioned, there are these holes in the mat. See, I was really curious when this game was announced, was, well, how do how do you have a ship hit a planet without moving the planet? Well, this makes a lot of sense. With these cutouts in the mat, these planets fairly well stay in place. They have a little bit of wobble room, but it's not too bad. And that way, if a ship hits them, which I did not demonstrate there you go, the ship just kind of bounces off. So that makes a lot of sense. Now I have the 4 planets shown here. However, planets will start off the game randomly placed face down, so you won't know what they are, and then they will have these discovery tokens sitting on them. So for example, here is a alpha token in the alpha quadrant. Thank you, Star Trek. And as you arrive at these planets, you sort of land in the orbit, or this white ring you see around each of these disks. You'll take the token, you'll get to hold on to at least 3 of those at a time. I'll cover those in a moment. And then you'll discover which type of planet it is. Now, I'll go ahead and mention this real quick. The planet colors relate to these technology tiles. So here I have the pink technology for the pink planet, and I'll show you just as one more example, the green technologies here at the green planet. Each technology sort of tree relates to that color of planets, and so if you want to research level 1 of the green tech, you'll have to sort of occupy and build a research facility on a green planet. When you want the next level, you'll need a second green planet. You can have more of the same building on the same planet, but you have to have a different planet for each level of the technology. And in the 2-player games, there's only, I believe, 4 of each color of planet on the entire mat. I think you go up to 8 for the 3 or 4 player games, but that means that you will be fighting over these planets, especially if you're trying to get to those higher levels of technology. Anyways, moving on with this for now. Now I have over here my starting gate. I mentioned this earlier. This is sort of your starting location. I have it showing here. However, the bottom corners of this mat aren't visible on this overhead camera without putting it all the way up in my ceiling. But in a 2-player game, these will start all the way down here at the bottom, just left of center for either player. So player 2s will be over here, player 1s is down here. In the 3 and 4 player game, you'll put them in the corners, again, out of visibility here on my overhead camera. But I just want to be able to show you these for your own reference. And as I mentioned, these are the artifacts. I'll cover these when I get to movement. All right, real quick, let me talk about the turn structure. I do have here a player aid card. Shows the 4 actions that you'll be taking in this game. You'll be moving, deploying, interacting, and building. To do the movement, which is probably the most complicated action of the game, and I'm not going to get super deep into the rules. You see, with a lot of these dexterity games, there's always a lot of rules overhead that kind of comes into play. Again, you're dealing with very uneven scales here. I mean, this is a ship versus a planet. That doesn't make a ton of sense, right? So you have to have a lot of rules in the dexterity element to sort of make all of this make sense. Anyways, you get to do 2 flicks with your standard move action. You can spend energy to power up that action more. And I just realized that my player boards did not come with me. Okay, so I do have a player board here, which I'm going to move these planets to bring it a little more into frame. Anyways, when you're doing the movement, like I said, you'll flick the disc. You get to make 2 flicks as your action. It can be different ships, obviously, or the same ship. However, there are maneuvers. There's several maneuvers within the game. They are listed here on the card. I realize you probably can't read them. But for example, if you're in the orbit of any planet, any of these discs, you can move anywhere within that orbit as a free action. So within the move action, you can reposition yourself around any planet to kind of make sure you can flick off in the direction that you want to go. In addition, if you're in orbit at a planet, you can land on that planet as, again, a free maneuver. You remove the ship token, putting it on your board, and then take one of the troop tokens from your board and put it on that planet. Although I should mention this is an artifact, not a planet, so you would not do that there. Consequently, you can also do the opposite. You can launch the person off the planet, putting them onto your board, and instead putting a ship into that orbit, which you can then again move around that orbit before heading off in another direction. Now I'll mention one other maneuver here real quick, and that is that if you are in the orbit of these artifacts, they count as basically a free flick. I sort of imagine these as the bumpers on a pinball machine. So if you hit that bumper, it lets you then flick off in another direction as a free action. So anytime you can sort of use these as a redirection point if you'd like to try and get some extra movement on your turn. And then lastly, one of the things that you can do as part of that movement is if you're in the orbit of an undiscovered planet, you would take the discovery token and flip the planet over, as I've kind of already mentioned. Now let me talk just real quick, and I'm not going to set all this up with with all these components on here, but I am going to put out an outpost. I'll put out a city. I'll put out a cake-shaped research facility. I will put out a starbase, and then let me use a couple of these lock tokens to sort of show you how those work. So the deploy action is used at any planet where you already have an outpost. So let's say you've arrived at a planet, you want to do that land action to put a troop on that planet. You can then use your build action, which you only get to do one build on a turn regardless of any kind of extra abilities. You can convert that person into an outpost. The person comes back onto your player board. For some reason, my fingers do not seem to want to place things on planets tonight. Anyways, with the outpost there, you can now deploy troops directly to that planet. So I can take a deploy action and put a person on that planet, and you can make 2 deployments on your turn. You can either deploy to where you have an outpost or a city, or you can deploy ships, but ships can only be deployed to your Stargate location, which again, may be way on the outer fringes of the board. With this troop down here on this planet with the outpost, I have a couple of options. I can convert that person, putting him back on my board into a research facility, which, as I mentioned earlier, would then let me put a cube onto the level 1 technology tile, which is in front of me. Each player has these same tiles in front of them. So now I have this geothermal harvester's technology because I have this token on this planet. Now again, if I want the orbital habitats technology, I would have to find another green planet, build another research facility on it, and then I would be able to gain the second technology. Now you might be wondering, what happens if I lose a planet? You do not lose the technology. However, you still have to have an equal number of planets for the level of technology that you are going for. So you would have to either reclaim that planet and find a third one, or find 2 additional planets to get up to level 3, which I'll throw that in here. And real quick, when you get to level 3, that is when you will tend to unlock these special spaceships. You can kind of maybe see here, there's a little icon that represents this ship. You can see the green ship is printed on that token versus, for example, this orange ship here. So I've covered the deployment action. I've kind of briefly covered the movement action. I've briefly covered the build action. If you have a troop and an outpost, boy, I really am struggling with the dexterity element of this dexterity game. Anyways, by having a troop and an outpost on a planet, I can consume both of those, converting them into a city. Now, when you build a city, or if you build a starbase, and to build a starbase, you have to first have 2 ships in the orbit of that planet. They get consumed, going back onto your board, and the starbase is placed out instead. Anyways, when you build either a city or a starbase, you're going to take the corresponding lock token above the spot that that starbase or city came from. You're going to flip it over and put it over in your ready energy section of your player board, and any other energy that you may have already spent gets to slide up and recharge at that point. That is, by the way, the only exploitation element of this game. There are no other resources in this game, just the energy, and I'll come back to what it does in just a moment. When you remove that lock token, you then get to place another item of the corresponding unit into that space. So in this case, I would get a ship, and in this space, I would unlock another troop. So you start off with 4 troops ready to go, 4 locked, 2 ships ready to go, which start play out here at your gate, and the other 4 positions will be locked. All these other tokens will be sitting here at the start of the game. So, all right, I've covered the movement, the deployment, the building. Let me go ahead and real quick mention interaction. I mentioned these tokens, these discovery tokens you can get on the planet. They have special actions which they can do, and as I also mentioned, those are shown here on the back of the rulebook. You can activate or interact with these as your action on your turn. So this one, I believe, lets me deploy 2 additional troops. However, that is the only action. and they can, I even believe they can be deployed onto a planet even if you don't have a ship there. You kind of just toss a guy out anywhere you want. This little tiny icon on the top means that you cannot do any further interactions, even by spending energy to charge the action. That's one thing I'll go ahead and I'll mention now. Most of these actions, like I said, you get 2 movement, you get 2 deployment, you get 1 interaction. However, on your turn, you can spend energy, sliding it down to the spent section, to do another of that relevant action. You can do 1 more flick for movement. You can deploy 1 more troop or ship. As I mentioned, you cannot charge building. You can charge interaction unless you do one of these actions that then basically says, do this action, and then that immediately ends your turn. I'll also real quick mention the endgame scoring cards. I briefly covered these earlier. You'll have a number of these that will come out during the setup of the game. You notice that they too have the hand icon in the top left corner. Basically, if you meet the requirements of these, and I'll go ahead and mention that they are 2-sided. If you meet the requirement of it, you must interact with it to put 1 or 2 of your cubes on it. 2 if you're the first person to activate or sort of claim that mission, and you'll get more points for those at the end of the game. The back sides of these, by the way, just kind of show the red. Hopefully you can see that there slightly here in the corner. These ones are a little bit more take that. So these will require you to do things in a quadrant that sort of belongs, or at least started off in the possession of one of your opponents. These are a bit more sort of open-ended and not necessarily as conflict-oriented, if you will. All right, real quick, let me mention overall game progress and sort of how this works. So based on your player count, you're going to have a number of these victory point tokens sitting out on the table. As I mentioned, I have 1s here. The 5s are still in the box. And you'll have a number of these out based on number of players. Now, most of your points are going to come from combat. In fact, there are no points awarded for deploying troops, exploring new planets, gaining most technologies, etc. There's no scoring in that. You only get scoring when you get conflict. And I haven't talked about conflict, so let me go ahead and do that quickly. So combat is automatically triggered when it's able to be triggered. There is no declaration of combat in this game, and combat is entirely deterministic. There's no dice rolling, no card play, anything like that. Basically, when a hostile force is more powerful than another hostile force of a different player color, a combat automatically happens. So for example, here I have 2 ships, a white and a blue ship. Now, if I use my little measuring stick, and I can check right now and see that they are not within short range, neither side is touching this short range end of this little piece, then there's no combat. If they're within short range, then they are eligible for combat, excuse me. However, each one has an offensive value of 1 and a defensive value of 1 for your standard ships. There is a technology which can possibly boost that. There is also technology that lets you engage in combat in long range, like this. However, since right now they both have the same offensive and defensive value, no combat happens. However, the moment that another ship comes into range of that combat, now you suddenly have 2-to-1, and conflict immediately happens at the end of that player's turn. So the white ship, being now outnumbered, would simply be removed. If instead we were dealing with a planet, so let me get a troop out here, and let me get a starbase here in orbit. The starbases have a defensive value of 1, cities a defensive value of 2, and troops a defensive value of 1. So right here I have a defensive value of 4. That means that the white ships would have to come in with an offensive value of 5 or higher in order to trigger combat against that planet. They'd have to have 5 ships sitting here in orbit. And there are some rules as far as blockading planets and not being able to build or deploy on planets that have hostile troops in their orbit, etc. I'm not going to go into those right now. But white player could theoretically just keep bringing in ships until they have enough. Now, of course, there are some wonky rules here in that if a ship hits another ship, both ships get destroyed. And so even I'm a bit curious when it comes to large fleet combat or trying to attack a very well-defended city or a planet. It would be a bit difficult. I guess you'd have to kind of keep rotating your planets around that orbit to reduce your chance of hitting your own ships and then taking them out of the fight. Again, that's one of the sort of wonky rules of the game. The other thing is regarding combat and score, every unit that you destroy, you get a point based on its defensive value. So if I took out one ship, I would get 1 point. If I managed to wipe out this planet with a value of 4, I would get 4 points. All the end game scoring cards, none of that triggers until the end of the game, even if you claim it obviously ahead of time. The only other thing I'll mention here just real quick, I think I've kind of covered enough of the basics for now, is that the game does seem a little slow to get things rolling. And maybe that makes sense based on the theme, but for example, if I wanted to colonize this planet, whether I discovered it or not, I would first have to get a ship into the orbit, not too hard, kind of flick it into there. Then I have to land on it to get the troop. Then I have to build to turn that troop into an outpost. Then I would have to deploy to get more people on that planet. I would have to then take one of the people in the outpost to build a city. I'd have to take the other person to get the research facility. I would then have to deploy the 2 people again, another action. I would then have to do a move action to allow me to launch them onto ships, maybe use those ships as a build action to get outposts. And even still with this setup here, I cannot, per the rules, deploy ships to that planet. I would have to deploy troops first instead, and then do a movement action to, again, launch them into ships. All that was, 7 or 8 different turns that it would take to completely sort of inhabit and control this planet, to have your technology, all that stuff working for you, and showing even there how many actions it takes to be able to get ships in play at a planet. You have to first get the troops there if they're not already there, and then do a movement action to be able to launch them for free into ships, even just to sit there and sort of defend the planet. So makes the game maybe feel a little slow, at least in some aspects of play. Anyways, this is Ascending Empires Zenith Edition. I hope this video was helpful for you in some capacity. If you're interested in this game and want to see more about it, certainly check out other content here on the channel. I've already briefly chatted about this game on a weekly Ratchet episode. I believe it was 43 or 44, if I recall. Should be able to check that out pretty easily, and I am planning on doing a more in-depth review of this game at some point in the future, so keep an eye out for that. Until then, thank you so much for stopping by. Thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you again soon. Cheers.